All right, in five. Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It has happened again. America wakes up to news that a hip hop star was fatally and senselessly shot. This time, the rapper is Takeoff of Atlanta's platinum hit machine, Migos, who was slain early Tuesday in Houston, according to the group. Houston police responded to the scene of a downtown shooting at a bowling alley and a pool hall, finding Takeoff dead. The two other victims were taken to hospitals and private vehicles. They are expected to be okay. Quavo, who was there with his relative, not just his bandmate, but his relative, uh, he was not physically hurt, but if anybody has seen the devastating video that has circulated TMZ and the web, you see how hurt he was, how this tragic Takeoff's death is the latest in a trend that stretches back to 2018. Each year since then, gun violence, whether through robbery or disagreement, has killed at least one hip hop artist who was either already famous or on the cusp of crossover fame. Takeoff's murder follows the deaths of stars like Half Ounce, PnB Rock, Young Dolph, King Von, Pop Smoke, Nipsey Hussle, and you all get the point. We can go on and on. And here to discuss this with the Black Press is one of hip hop's all-time legends, the lead of my favorite group, Public Enemy, the one and only Mr. Chuck B. Hey, Chuck.
Good morning, Stacey. How are you?
Good, Chuck. You do so much. Folks, of course, know you from Public Enemy first and foremost, but I love your work outside of the radio, outside of music. I mean, I looked at, of course, that great documentary on Dave Parker, the Cobra, which you narrated so beautifully. And these are some of the things that I would prefer to be talking to you about today. But unfortunately, we are talking about the death, the untimely, the shameful shooting death of Takeoff, Amigos. Chuck, this keeps happening. He was a kid, 28 years old. Let's put aside his hip hop career and stardom. What I keep hearing from so many was that he wasn't the confrontational type, even quiet. So why are hip hop artists apparently prime targets for violence, Chuck?
Well, first of all, when you said, you want to be able to, me and you dialogue on things that I like to do. I'm bred in the arts. The arts is my life, Music came along because it's an aspect of that extension of me being artistic as a communicator to the world, or just as an inside communication to myself on the outside. And I exude that. I try to. And those are my joys. I got involved into this because it was an extension of my artistic self that was able to give me a confidence into who I was and how and why I should be here. You know what I'm saying? And it was an extension of myself to lend peace, unity, fun, peace, unity, love, and having fun as the original attributes that hip hop, gave off. But somehow the culture of what it was, what it is, and what it came out of to get away from those ills in the 70s and the 80s, if you look across the board, we as a people might have been broke, but it was hard to break us, and we wasn't broken. Right. We were connected to each other, and the arts and the musics were understood as extensions of, when you played a Stevie Wonder and the Gladys Knight in the Crib, it was like they was your aunts and uncles. So they spoke to everybody. And very rarely did we have artists that were our young age at that particular time as teenagers and younger, or maybe even in the early 20s, that actually spoke directly to us. Artists were usually, older types when they were big, and they had some tenure underneath them that made them big. They wasn't like boom, come out of nowhere. They had to come up through the ranks, you know what I'm saying? And when
Yeah.
they came up through the ranks, whether it was artistic, levels that they had to rise up through, you just didn't come out of nowhere and be dope out of nowhere.
Hmm.
You had to come up through a chain of events, through a rites of passage. And you hit that stage. When you hit that stage, understood that you came through a lot, just like, boxers. Boxers just don't go into, the heavyweight championship of the world.
Right.
You got to go through a lot just to be seen. And that's how it was. To be heard, you had to go through a lot. Even in your neighborhood, you had to be the best out of the best out of the best. And when you was the best out of the best out of the best, you knew how to handle the crowd. You know how to rock the mic. And people left with the greatest time of their life, even in your neighborhood.
Right.
Well, that kind of got interrupted, man. You throw out a rites of passage, you could come out of anywhere from any time with no proof of who you are and who you're speaking to. And that's what the industry formed. The industry formed when it became a recorded industry. It became this thing that could make you instantly, boom, come out of nowhere and then dictate to a large audience.
Yeah.
And the lowest hanging fruit that was always kind of like familiar in music and black music, lowest hanging fruit was always the streets.
Hmm.
Whether in the 50s, you rocking in, blues, in the pool hall and the beginnings of R&B. And, that was grown folks music, but it was also, grown folks issues and stuff like that in the 50s. And, then later on in the 60s, it became a little bit more applicable to teens, like Motown and all that. So that was then. The answer, that was a long beginning of the answer to the question, why is this happening? Because somehow the narrative of hip hop was, co-opted by, okay, you coming in here and your only purpose is to figure out how you get that bottom line, that bottom. And the thing that was always the lowest hanging fruit for black folks is the problems. And if we could grab the problems and make something out of the problems and reflect the problems and even have to be the problem sometimes to relate, then all of a sudden it was first a reflection became a dictation. It's a lifestyle that's out there. But in the beginnings of hip hop, it was like how to get away from the lifestyle.
Exactly. I keep saying the same thing, actually.
The cats back in the days, there was a clear separation, man. We had a separation, like over there, like in my hometown in Roosevelt, we knew who the thugs were, the ball players, the cats that just went to the park to talk to the girls. We had definitive separations of who you were as a personality and who you were forming to be growing up. When it came a synonymous thing, like this is the role type and this is the archetype of black males in America, and it's just this one type of like if it comes down to this, I'll roll on you. That's when it became a murky area, because this image was the one that was palatable to being sold to white America as this is who we are. We ain't nothing else.
Yeah. How much does money play a role in this, Chuck? Because back then, you guys did so much, but the money is different.
The money is white America, young white kids, and I would say, I'm being general, young white kids are, it's been for like the last 70 years, young white kids have been kept away from who we are as black America. And even black kids are kept away for who we are as blacks in America. Yeah. So we clamor for like this definition, knowledge of self. But also there's a natural thing as human beings, like, I want to know about this. And our culture and our people are rich with, not only rich with history, but rich with the mystery and unknown. Mm-hmm. So white kids was always trying to figure out, okay, what is it about this black thing that seems like it's got more spice than the stuff that's poured on me all the time, how to be white in America. Mm-hmm. And this whole thing of being black in America is what they've clamored to try to find out, like, oh, wow. And so they're open for the real deal, so to speak. But that real deal got to come through a portal of delivery. And the portal of delivery might in the past been come through radio, records, television, Dick Clark and his Soul Train. Wow, I got a slice of black life, although I ain't got a black friend or a black person I've touched. But
Right.
I think I know black people. Fast forward into the internet, into social media, into gadgets that people got. It's one thing that it's synonymous with everybody. You could be what you want to say you are. You could say this or that or whatever. But one thing that you have in common with the next human being is a gadget that's attached to you.
Yeah.
You got two choices, Stacy. You got Android or iPhone.
Yep.
And there ain't a third choice. And this is what human beings are attached to. And coming through them screens is what used to be a reflection. Now it's a dictation. They'll tell you what it is and tell you who to be. And a lot of people are looking for themselves in the screens. And we're all subject in our families and our children are all subjects to this radiation. And white America gets the black life, not even on a real person. They get it through the screen now. And so that, there's a large investment into what they might think is culture. It's a large investment, and it's different from before. Before it was like, boom, you come up, you happen to get a little thing going in, you play a concert, people paying $5, $10, $15 a head, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
You got your percentage of that. You got 15% of a record deal, and you're splitting with 10 other members and stuff like that. So it was a living.
Yeah.
Nobody made a killing. Even the promoters and people like the record company, everybody was trying to make a living. That's when you talk about it was a black market, black demographic, and we also got to pay attention to the population. How many people we got in the United States of America anyway? And we come up with this 12 to 15%. Well, with 12 to 15%, there's a lot there, but it ain't 90%. It ain't 70%. And when you talk about selling something to white America and the populations that are inside the 320 million people, and then it becomes pop, which is popular. And what's popular sold from black people is always like, we're going to push the negative narrative.
Yeah.
And that's a big price tag.
And unfortunately, it gets recognized like now, Takeoff is dead, right? PnB Rock is dead. Pop Smoke is dead. And we keep
charts. And they shoot up the charts, and all of a sudden their death becomes the biggest story. And not only the biggest story, it's the lingering story. And that's macabre behavior on all parts. It's macabre to continue to talk about the story. It's macabre when they shoot up the charts and all of a sudden their biggest records happens post-mortem. And
almost
people,
an incentive, right?
Well, people might argue, they say, well, Elvis got bigger even after he died. Yeah, but Elvis was big when he lived too. But the whole thing of people in their prime before they reach 30 and 40 years old of murder, she wrote, being the narrative of the most lucrative in this genre is disturbing. Yeah, it's so disturbing. And let me tell you, man, I held up this sign last year. The artists that were 40 and over who had died of illnesses and diabetes and overdose. And then you have the young ones. It's murder and the overdose. And then in the rock world is this overdose and suicide. And I dealt with the rock world for 4 years as a member of Prophets of Rage. And that was disturbing because these are the things that people have figured out on how to go at, mental illness. And since the pandemic, we've seen a metastasizing of mental illness. But when mental illness runs rampant in the communicators, at the people at the towers of communication, that's when you have widespread panic.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Jamil Hill, who I always appreciate a lot of things she says and does. She said that she was in college when Biggie and Tupac were killed, and she said she thought there was no way we'd ever experience anything remotely close to that again. She said now it's happening so frequently that you barely have time to recover before someone else is killed. I mean, you know, a lot of people thought, okay, that was it, right? It's an eye opener in many ways. Biggie, Tupac was enough, and then of course, you and I was at Jam Master Jay's funeral, and we you know 2001 or something like that, 2002, and we saw it happen there, and now it seems like a frequent occurrence. Like as I said at the top of this show, at least one a year. I mean,
Yeah,
where are we? Where
it's
are we? What are we doing?
happening once a month, bro. Once
Yeah,
every 2 months. So, and that's been heavy for like the last, 2 to 3 years. If you want to go 2 to 5 years, on artists that might not be nationally known, but they are known within the genre of somebody that people follow. And people follow, acts quicker and differently than before. Before it's like, okay, let me follow this act, go to the concert, go to the store, do the in-store, whatever, listen to them. Maybe, hopefully they get on the radio. Now they can follow them instantly. Go on the
right,
phone, click on, boom, I'm in there, I'm there, I'm with them. They communicate with me. I mean, they giving me heat. We go back and forth on Instagram and stuff like that. So it's instantaneous. But one thing, Stacey, the arts are not taught, and when the arts are not taught, um, you can have a whole bunch of problems between people not knowing the line between fantasy and reality.
and that seems to be a big problem.
We as Black folks, if you don't have control over your economics, your education, or your enforcement, or your environment, the 4 E's, then you don't have control over your reality. Those are your realities.
Yeah,
And if you ain't got the reality, the fantasy world could get sold to you real quick. They could sell the white world a fantasy world, but they also are rooted in the certain realities of control and positioning that these countries' laws and bylaws and constitution fights for. But with us, we're clamoring to get out of a plantation state.
Yeah, recently my producer, you met Greer, she attended a special meeting to unite hip hop. Special Ed, KRS-One, yourself, leading the charge with all in the same gang movement. Obviously, there's a message to provide, but what is the message? What to reach this generation though? How do you reach this generation?
How young is young, and what's the generation? Generation is 5 years apart. You got a 28-year-old and a 23-year-old that probably don't even relate to each other because they think they could build on their differences of who they like, what they choose to do. So the generation gaps, I think, and just not getting long-winded about that. Once upon a time, when white America was complaining about the quote-unquote generation gap, I remember when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, we as Black folks never really had a generation gap. We had passed down, boom. You got your elders passed down. We kind of like the same music, or better yet, this is what you better do. This is what we doing. And you got your space, but your space is within our space. So we didn't have these areas of separation. And then all of a sudden in 1980, I remember it was the beginning of the generation gap because it was fueled in our communities by the influx of super drugs and guns. You couldn't really find easy guns in 1970, but by 1980 you could, especially in New York, and that spread like wildfire during the R&B 80s of Reagan and Bush.
Yeah.
So that began the area of separation in there, and also generations where an older head might have got locked up or eliminated from the community from COINTELPRO, and the younger head comes up and gets fast, big money and got a gun to protect it. Old head might return, or old head might be around with a certain code of hood ethics that the young head just says, well, F you, old dude, what could you tell me? I got more money than you. You a crack or a smackhead, and I'm not respecting you for anything.
Mm-hmm.
That whole imagery just destroyed the generation gap of the OG and the young head. And that was in the 1980s. And you fast forward into the 90s and the years into the new century, and the gaps have widened. And COINTELPRO, which still continues, but in different forms, fills up the generation gaps with what they want to fill it up with. Animosity, hate, dissension, division, all those things. And it plays out. It plays out even into the streets. Even when the drug game, quote unquote, dried up in a certain sense. You can see that the drug game dries up, but they try to bring it back all the way to the point that the digital drug is disturbing.
Right.
And the digital drug has got a lot of people addicted and could easily turn into a consumer. And if you turn into a consumer, that means you're flooding your money up into some area of somebody just making money. And that's where that's the games, you know? So the rap game has become also a part of the game of you know, getting your mind, your real estate of your mind. People are paying, not even, you know, they're paying rent to somebody else for the space that's rented out in their heads. And that's what it is, without going deeper, because when you get deeper, you start going into areas of cats not knowing what you're talking about. But because we're not in a reading and comprehensive public,
right,
in the United States. So, you know, if you don't read and you happen to lock into something on the digital tip, the fact that it could appear and reappear and get changed and flip or disappear on you is the fact that that's not really reading. Dr. John Hendrik Clark, I posted the other day, I said the dude read and comprehended everything until he was blind. Reading and comprehended, meaning that he, you know, we cannot make light of scholars. The minute we started making light of scholars, like, oh yeah, big deal, they smart, so what? I'm smart, my thing too. When you make light of scholars, then it's the beginning of a bad road to no place, because scholars have to read the good, bad, and the ugly and comprehend it for discussion. Not to say that they write, but they have to be able to field it all. And scholars are studied like that. And I'm speaking for myself, I read what I like. I don't read what I don't like. Scholars have to read what they don't like. That's the biggest difference. That's why you can't belittle their existence.
Yeah. And what about the younger guys today in hip hop? Are they listening to their forefathers? Are they listening to Public Enemy? Are they listening to Run DMC or Kool Herc, or you know, the lyrics? I'm reminded, and this doesn't go too far back at all. Lauryn Hill, she said Black rage is founded on blatant denial, right? She says squeezing economics, subsistence, survival, deafening silence, and social control. Black rage is founded on wounds in the soul. When you hear stuff like that, as you're in the same genre, these kids are in the same genre. They're in hip hop, you know, genre. Do they know that Lauryn Hill wrote that? Do they know that, you know, Nas in 1996 said, "I gave you power"? He's talking about being from the perspective of a gun. Do they know you know, and Flav and Terminator X? You said fight the power. Do they know what that means? Do you find that they know what that means?
I don't think we could generalize, Stacey. There's hundreds and thousands of artists out there. Who do you count? Do you count the ones that, because they show that they actually are successful and have more people locking into them? And when we start getting into that thing of followers, likes and dislikes and all that, those algorithms that really don't add up to who we are as a people. There are hundreds and thousands of artists. I have 10 stations on Rap Station. We play rap music from everywhere, the underground, the underfound, you know, artists that have had a 15 to 20 year career called Hip Hop Gods, women artists who are really all over the world in more abundance than they are in the United States. But, you know, if you just pay attention to what's what's being washed up on your shore, you're going to get a limited view of what it really is. There's more artists out there that know everything. And there is really no kind of educational forum that people can go to, like other aspects of life. Our arts and our culture possibly should be taught to us. But if we don't control the educational curriculum, you're going to let corporations teach you what the art form is. And whenever corporation teaches culture, God walks out the room.
In the 80s, there was self-destruction. There was, that message, right? That people, or you go to the hood, you saw people wearing hats that self-destruction, t-shirts, self-destruction. Is there,
because we saw what was going on, and I told you in the beginning of hip hop, especially in New York, and especially in the real beginning in the Bronx, cats wanted to get away from that. They didn't want to really, be in the Bronx. They had to be in the Bronx because their parents were in the Bronx, and to de-emphasize left it an abandoned Bronx. Their parents might have been there and say, okay, we moved into the Bronx because it was cheaper housing, or it was the place to be in 1966 or 67 when there was opportunity to move in. And because they de-emphasized the Bronx after splitting it up and breaking it up, the Bronx was a different place in 1975 than it was in 1965. And Black folks were there, Puerto Ricans were there, but it was also in an area of New York City, which had de-emphasized it and stopped the servicing up into the Bronx. And even New York was left abandoned by the United States of America in a tough, fiscal, beleaguered United States of America that they wasn't sure of itself post the Nixon resigning and Gerald Ford, and nobody knew. And right now, nobody knows the climate going into this country a year from now anyway. It's a lot of guessing now. Pressures and like what the hell is going on. So this was similar in a certain way, where the first people that wanted to spit the angst and what they saw in New York City, and you could say Brooklyn too, you could say Manhattan too, where Black folks were living, a lot of cats wanted to get away from that. They saw the emergence of hard drugs, like internet coming out of nowhere. They saw the emergence of guns, coming out of nowhere. Cats wanted to get away from that. They didn't want to spit about that. So what you had in the 80s is cats also MCs and rappers, and those values and those qualities was still, adhered to in the 80s. Like, yeah, okay, why are you going to say that? Yeah, we could have a message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five and Duke Booty to talk about what's going on. But also Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five made party records to not talk about those things that everybody saw every day. So there was a balance, and the balance, was talk about what you've seen, but still keep the party rocking and try to at least bring some good times into the picture. Public Enemy, as older heads, a lot of times people said, well, we brought a political message in, but also we came from the 60s. So we remember there was a time where might have been broke, but not broken. And that's all we try to bring to the table. It's like, yeah, this is how it was in the 60s. A lot of cats were born in the 70s doing hip hop in the 80s and the 90s. We were born in the 60s. So we come from, Black Panther Party lunch programs, Nation of Islam doing things in the neighborhood. We remember things like Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X being assassinated when they were living people. We remember, on my birth certificate, it says Negro. And I remember being called colored when I was 5 and 6. And I remember being 9 and 10 and Black was beautiful. That's a 10-year period. So I was able to pour that all into rap songs into the 80s, into the 90s, of where we come from, which had been kind of like pushed under the rug and Americana, so to speak. And this was not only interesting to us as a people in knowledge itself, but it was definitely an interesting curiosity for young white kids to say, what is this thing all about? And internationally as well. And if they're kept away from something that's good, which we all had something good, they will clamor to get it. And that was the way it happened for a while before they realized that also the thing that has gone with Black life in America, in the United States of America, or the Americas, if you want to include the diaspora, which I think is impossible to detach if you want to actually go forward on this planet as a Black person. You got to gather in the whole planet of of our blackness, but that's a whole nother story.
Well,
But
and
I'm saying that, with that in mind, this curiosity of like, what is this hip hop thing? What is this black thing? The world always seems to want to know, and they
yeah,
mimic our greatness. And if they could find a way to finance and mimic and have our people mimic us at our worst, to stereotype and generalize us into being a bunch of murdering thugs and metastasize that over a 10, 15, 20-year period as being normal, then we got a problem. I don't blame the youth. You got to blame. There's some adults who are hiding behind the scenes, who are Pied Pipering and Pied Papering, all this madness into making this thing look like it's normal. So yeah, was it a shootout at a dice game? Yeah. Was it black men involved in that circle? Yeah. But it's somebody pushing buttons and pulling levers, and not only doing it, but they have been enriched financially greatly by these incidents.
wow. Well, Chuck, we'll leave it at that. One more thing, though, on a side note, on another note, at the top, I was talking about the other great things you do. I just have to publicly give you big ups for that, Dave Parker, the Cobra.
Yeah, Dave Parker was your man, huh?
You know, I mean, it was a sad thing when he went to Cincinnati, because he's like a Pittsburgh man, and but he was still probably one of the, not probably, but certainly one of the most underrated superstars ever. And no matter what sport you talk about, I mean, this guy was so fearsome. I mean,
He's vocal. You had Dave Parker and Reggie Jackson at the same time. They were problems because they spoke their mind and their spirit.
yep.
And they preluded, rappers at that particular time. Rappers were the next thing. You have Reggie Jackson and Dave Parker. You can't tell me that they don't come out of the Muhammad Ali vernacular.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You have
Wow.
rappers come out, not too long, after the greatness of Reggie Jackson and Dave Parker at the same time. And,
Well, Chuck, any more in the works?
a lot of art. I don't know. I chose to talk to you, Stacey. A lot of people coming at me asking me questions about this, that, or whatever, this individual in hip hop, that situation in hip hop. And there'll be a time. And I think like we're gonna have our own tech applications that will air my voice. But anytime you want to have me, it's always, we're the same, we're the same thing. We're trying to get the word out there on our terms and not just anybody else's terms. And so I have to also be wary because everybody wants to talk to me and get those bites on something. And I'm like, we're entering a different time where now, Elon Musk bought Twitter and now they're going to charge $20 a month for your blue verification.
What
So I'm
sense does that make?
I'm gonna let my blue verification like wear off. So in these 90 days before they strip me of it, I'm gonna let everybody know my app and where they can come to, and that's where I'll be most of the time because and I'm not on IG. My team runs it, so a lot of times people are like, "Oh man, you on this?" And I said, "Not really," But these are the times where I think that you really have to watch, where your voice is and where your voice will be heard in its truth. And big ups to you and Ben, Dr. Ben, and also Greer for making this thing happen.
Yeah, I always appreciate you, Chuck. And we'll see you on a different platform other than Twitter. That's for sure. Chuck
Sure.
D, the one and only, keep, as he always has been, fighting the power. We appreciate you, Chuck.
Appreciate you too. All
Thank
the best.
you all for joining. Let it be known.